Hey, deserving listeners. Today, I'm just going to be by myself answering your emails. So let's get into it. This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist, a professor, and someone who enjoys reading patron emails. This first one, anonymous patron, asked me to talk about the new documentary on Netflix called Tell Me Who I Am. I think it's on Netflix. I get so screwed up now. It's just like, was it Netflix or Amazon or Disney Plus or on demand on my cable? It's just like, geez. Anyway, Tell Me Who I Am. Excellent documentary. Highly recommend. I'm not going to spoil it because I'm guessing most of you have not seen it. It has a major twist that, if spoiled, I think would actually spoil the enjoyment of the documentary. So I'm just going to talk generally. Powerful story. I cried a number of times. It's directed well. They have this really interesting way of telling the story. Chapter 1 is, so the story is about two twins, about, these twin adult men. Chapter 1 is like one of the twins. Chapter 2 is the other twin. Chapter 3 is the two of them. And it's just really well done. And I think it needs to be seen for a number of different social engineering reasons. One is that people need to understand the effects of childhood abuse. And I think that this documentary, in, one way, provides some, for those who don't know, these guys are, I think they're in their 50s or 50 years old or something. And they're still busted up about the abuse that they went through. It's still affecting them, which is the norm. And this movie portrays that pretty well. It also gets into memory and amnesia in a very real way instead of the way Hollywood typically deals with it. I can spoil the main premise of the documentary because it's in the trailer. So just to entice you, if you don't know, it's about these twins, and they're in England, Britain, somewhere where they have non-American accents. That's the extent of my knowledge of the location. And they have they're twins, and they're in the 70s or something. And one of the twins gets in a car accident or a motorcycle accident, really bad one, hurts his head pretty bad. And when he wakes up, he doesn't remember anything. He doesn't remember who he is. He doesn't remember where he lives. He doesn't remember his name. He doesn't remember what bicycles are or what a car does. I mean, he has the mind of a child and the knowledge of a baby. But the one thing he remembers is his twin brother. He remembers that he has a twin brother, and he remembers his name. And he doesn't remember his mother. He doesn't remember his father. He doesn't remember his home. He doesn't remember his girlfriend. He doesn't remember his best friend. He doesn't remember anything, but he remembers his twin brother. And so the other twin, the twin who didn't get in the accident, is now and because they were very tight before the accident. He's now it's now his job to educate his twin brother on what the world is. This is a bicycle. This is an apple. That's your girlfriend. That's our mother. That's our father. This is our house. And the twin who was in the accident trusts the other twin 100% because he doesn't know not to. And he completely depends on his brother to tell him everything because he doesn't know anything about his previous life. And so after a while, the twin without the accident, without the amnesia, suddenly realizes that he can tell his brother anything about his past. He can tell him anything that happened, whether right or wrong, and his twin brother will believe him. And so he's given this tremendous power of, how do I tell the story of our past? Because there's some difficult parts of it. Do I tell my twin brother about the past? And it's just a fascinating story. Highly recommend it. All right, going on to another email. Patron Veronica from Hong Kong writes, as a Hong Kong protester in my late 20s, I would like to email you. I have borderline personality disorder. I have no self-worth. I would like to ask you a question. How can I cope with the paranoia that I did or said something wrong with my therapist? I worry that I will cause my therapist to become frustrated or annoyed and therefore reject me. And frankly, I'm tired of my therapist telling me to just be aware of it and let it be. These feelings hurt so bad when my therapist became my favorite person. She can literally make or break my day. So let me just read that again. These feelings hurt very bad. My therapist became my favorite person, and she can literally make or break my day. I once cut myself 3 times a day for a week because my therapist didn't reply to my messages outside of therapy. I know that boundaries are for protection, but boundaries really hurt me. I have seen her for 5 months, and I feel like my percentage of growth is very slow. I don't want to stop seeing her, and I don't want to change to another therapist because I really connect with her, and I know she really cares. So let me chime in here. So I don't know you. I know I haven't assessed you. Your therapist would know better, and you would know better, frankly. But in general, I receive a lot of emails like this every day, and I say that every time I respond to this email. I don't want to demean your email. It's an important email, and it bears repeating. A lot of people out there listening suffer from borderline personality, meaning that people who have been relationally traumatized in a particular way and developed a particular way of coping with that is what we call borderline personality. And what that means is that early on, you discovered that the only way you could retain any kind of attachment security, any kind of shred of safety in relationships was to pay very, very close attention to what other people were doing, particularly if they were betraying you or loving you. If there's a very fine line between someone who is there for you and loyal and someone who is going to hurt you and is going to reject you and is going to make you feel terrible and is going to remind you that no one really, really cares. So because of that defense and because of that paranoia, because your early life actually taught you to be paranoid because you needed to be, because that's the way life was, then you will seek out therapy as a way of trying to help that, and which is great. You're in the perfect place. But as that relationship intensifies, you're going to find yourself really wanting that therapist because it's the first or one of the only really good relationships you've ever had in your life. You're going to want that therapist to become essentially your mother or a spouse, something that is very, very close, a relationship that is, all encompassing. It's normal because if you've never really had that, then you need that. And you deserve that, but your therapist can't be that. And even though you might have asked your therapist, it sounds like you might have, since you're talking about your therapist establishing boundaries with you, you get pushback, and you understand that intellectually. You're like, yeah, I get that, boundaries professional. I get that this person's my therapist, blah, blah, blah. But it just hurts so bad to be around this person. Okay, all of that we can understand. Another part of the borderline personality defense mechanism is to ramp up one's signaling that you're upset about being rejected and betrayed, to alert other people to know that you are hurting. When you were young, in all likelihood, you realized that you were not going to be heard or seen unless you exaggerated your feelings. Only then did someone actually pay attention. And the best way to exaggerate your feelings is to actually have the feelings amplified. So there's a mechanism inside of you neurologically, it's not a choice, that will amplify your feelings, because that was the only way when you were 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 7-year-old. The only way you could be heard is if you amplified those feelings, not artificially, but actually ramp them up. Again, it's not your fault that you had to develop that mechanism. And again, it's not conscious. It is something unconscious. So as a result of that fairly rigid defense mechanism, as you feel neglected by your therapist, which is going to feel that way because you want her to be all-encompassing, which you deserve, but can't have from your therapist, then neurologically, your anger and your messaging, your signaling that you're upset will increase because you're crying out for attention. You're crying out for someone to care, which, again, you deserve. That can even result in cutting, in trying to alert other people, look, I'm so distressed, I'm cutting. Now, some cutting's complicated. Non-suicidal self-injury is complicated. There's many causes. One is just self-hatred. Another is it actually will biologically produce endorphins, which reduce pain, which when you're experiencing emotional pain, the endorphins will actually decrease that pain as if you took morphine or any kind of mind-numbing drug. And so there's a lot of reasons for cutting, but one of them is actually to signal to other people or even to the self that you're suffering. And so now, again, I don't know you, so there's no way for me to know any of this, really. But you are presenting as a very, very quintessential borderline reactivity to therapy. It's textbook. Now, I'm not demeaning it. Again, I'm not saying it's wrong or you shouldn't feel that way. You absolutely should feel that way. I'm glad you're feeling that way. It means therapy is working. And I know you hate that. You're angry at it because your therapist says, well, be aware of it and let it be. And that doesn't feel good because it doesn't take away the feeling. And you're still left with your feelings in between sessions. It doesn't solve the problem. And I understand that. And I specialize in treating borderline people. I know. I've been there with people. I've been there with people for years. I've worked with individuals with borderline for years. And every session they come in and say the same thing that you're saying. I can't believe you neglected me so much. I'm so angry at you. But I want you to be close to me. I think about you all the time. I want you to be my husband. I want you to be my brother. I want you to be my dad. Why can't you spend more time with me? Why can't we hang out? Why can't we, it's all of those feelings, which is normal. It's good that you're having them. It's painful. It's the only way you can heal. There is no way to heal from your relational traumas without going through that tension. As you absorb the secure attachment you have with your therapist, you can begin to trust others and then build relationships with others so that you can actually perhaps even have a spouse or someone who is very close to you without it becoming overly complicated and difficult for the two of you to stay together. So that's my, I've said this before, and you might have even heard me say this before, and maybe you didn't apply it to you, but I'm applying it to you too. Again, I don't know you, so you could even be, just making all this up. You could be a figment of your imagination. I don't know. So take everything I say with that in mind. Stay in therapy. Tell your therapist how you feel. Tell your therapist that you're reaching out to podcasts because you're so upset in between session. And there's, some things your therapist can do. Maybe there's day treatment you can get a part of. Maybe there's a safety plan you could make more robust. Maybe there's a peer counseling situation you could get involved in. Talk with your therapist about that so you can have more ongoing support. But stay in therapy, keep working it out. Work on emotional regulation. That's a big one. Work on effective ways of regulating your emotions that don't involve destructive patterns. And like I said, maybe you need a safety plan to help you stay safe. But yeah, I know that pain well. I've been with people in that pain for years. I know your pain, and there is no answer to it, and it isn't anyone's fault other than the people who mistreated you growing up. That's the people to blame. Those are the people to be angry at, not your therapist. From your description, maybe there's more to the story. All right, next question. Oh, and before I move on, as I always say, this podcast is not for therapy. It should not be considered therapy. It should not be considered a clinical service. You should not be depending on me for clinical services. This is an information education podcast, and you should always be consulting in person with a clinician. Next question from you, patron Veronica from Hong Kong. How can I cope with the helplessness induced by police state's brutality? I feel like I'm really suffering from the police state brutality. I feel that I'm selfish to go to therapy and work on myself and not helping people who are suffering in my city of Hong Kong. Sometimes I don't want to help because I feel like no one has helped me in the past. Just chiming in here. Hard to answer. I don't know the answer to that question. How to cope with helplessness induced by Hong Kong's police brutality. I don't know. It's not really my area. And you say you feel selfish because you're going to therapy and not helping the protesters. That's a question that you have to figure out for yourself. It's certainly reasonable if you're suffering mentally, which it sounds like you are, that you need to take care of yourself before you can do anything in terms of protesting. And people often ask me, questions like this, how do I cope with X situation? And, I sort of don't like the question because it implies that it's your fault and that you need to figure out a way of coping. No one would say that during the Holocaust into World War II in Germany and Poland, if the victims were to ask me through time and space, how do I cope with the brutality of of Nazi Germany, of people dying around me of starvation? This is an extreme example. We would all expect us not to say, well, here's how you cope. I mean, certainly you could throw out some coping skills, I suppose, but most of us would be like, God damn, I don't think, how does anyone cope with, no one's going to be able to cope with that. It's awful. So, that's an extreme situation, but it's similar. If you're in Hong Kong and you feel like the state and the government is not safe, then it's rough. I feel similarly. There are so many things about my government that bother me. There are a lot of things about a lot of people's governments that bother me. And the fact that we need a child to tell us, Greta, to tell us that politicians need to pay attention to reality and that our livelihood and our children, our grandchildren's grandchildren are going to hate us if we don't do something. And it isn't impossible. There are things to do. Yeah, it's very distressing to me. And how am I supposed to cope with that? And the question implies like it's up to me. It's my responsibility to cope with that difficult situation. Well, I don't think that's my fault. I don't think it's on me to cope. I don't think it's on you to cope with the government's brutality and its disregard for the wishes of the people. Government is supposed to be by the people, right? According to Americans, anyway. So, I don't know. I think it's part of these difficulties is just acknowledging that there's no way to cope. With climate change, for me, what are we supposed to do? Our governments can, we're arguing currently in my country, United States, about tweets and about improper political phone calls, which are important, but minuscule compared to the importance of saving the earth. In 100 years, is anyone going to care about a tweet that happened? No. They're going to be like, God damn, I wish those people would have done something earlier. We could have saved ourselves so much trouble, so much money, so many lives, so many species on the planet, so many critical, elements and components of our ecosystem and our climate. And they just didn't, they were focused on what tweets, what is that? This thing, the early 21st century, there's this thing called Twitter. And And there's a president who, said a lot of things. Why didn't they know? Didn't they know? So yeah, it's tough for me too. How am I supposed to cope with that? How do I live my life? How do I look at YouTube and Reddit and talk on this podcast about anything other than that? I don't know the answer to that. I will tell you, for me, what I try to do is find balance, because otherwise my life will spin out of control one way or the other. So I try to find a balance between acknowledging reality and dealing with it in whatever way I can, while at the same time balancing that with focusing on other things, like tweets from presidents, I guess. There's a balance for me that I have struck that I will feel when it becomes out of balance. So that's what I do. So maybe focusing on it when you have the energy, and doing something about it when you have the energy. And then when you don't, shift your focus to something else. The other thing is to think about what kinds of things you can do. Think about smaller situations. You're at lunch with your siblings and you're 10 years old, and your siblings take your cookie and you're enraged. What do? Well, you start screaming, Johnny took my cookie. You tell on him, Johnny gives the cookie back, or you get another cookie or something. You see an injustice, you scream, someone comes in and they fix the situation. Well, when we grow up, we have the same injustices that we observe, and then we scream in our way, but nothing happens. But we hope that something happens, or we expect something to happen, or we wish something would happen. But we have to understand that when it comes to national or, large problems that involve billions of people, our voice is just not going to be heard. And if we're going to do something, we have to organize, or we have to be part of an organization, and then our voice might be heard, but might not. And part of the coping, I think, is learning that that's just the case. That I can kick and scream and make tantrums, but no one's going to care, because there's too many people and they're just not listening. And even if they did care, it's not like anything's going to change because of you. And I think, like Americans, they don't like to be a part of organizations as much as maybe other places do. They like to express themselves, but the way to get things done is through organizations. It's the main way. So this is just one way that I try to cope. It's like, if I'm going to do something, I can complain about it. I can, talk about it. I can post about it. I can think about it, but that doesn't do me any good. I have to recognize that all that energy is probably for nothing. It's just, all the articles I read and get upset about, it's like for nothing. It'd be like, Johnny takes my cookie, and I sit there and I go upstairs and I start writing in my journal about it. Well, okay, if it makes you feel better to vent, I guess, that's great. But you got to do the thing that actually creates change. And the way that you typically create change in our society is through organizing. Anyway, you go on with your email. Do you think it's possible for me to join Bob's DBT course through the internet? It's too expensive for me to stay in the United States for a year just to join the DBT group, but I really cannot find any DBT courses in my city of Hong Kong. I bought the DBT workbook you talked about, but I felt it's stupid, which is a feeling that I can't explain. End of email. Yeah, I get a lot of emails like this too. I don't know what to do about this. I'm powerless over this process as well. I mean, you live in a society in which there isn't access to DBT, and there might not be access to a lot of services. I don't know. So I don't know what to do. DBT would be great for you for a number of reasons, and yeah, I'm glad that you're interested in it. Sometimes self-help can do something. You could also have your therapist look over the DBT workbook and maybe, just bring it into your therapy and be like, look, I want to work on this for a while. And, a good therapist will invite that, even if it's not necessarily their expertise. They'll definitely, it's not foreign to them, the ideas of DBT, the basics of it. You might also be able to find a DBT therapist on BetterHelp or Talkspace, the internet-based therapy services. I have a hard time believing that BetterHelp and Talkspace doesn't have at least a handful of DBT therapists that would be available to talk with you. So that's another venue. I don't know. Again, talk with your therapist about that as well. All right, let's take a break. When we get back, let's continue reading patron emails. Actually, let's not take a break. Let's actually just make the rest of the episode for patrons only. In this next part of the episode, I'm going to be taking a theoretical orientation test. It has 72 questions that try to determine the way I see the world, how I see human beings, which dictates how I actually treat people. It's a very common sort of thing for therapists to do, to try to figure out their theoretical orientation, as they call it, how they're oriented theory-wise. Because, you have psychoanalysis, you have solution focus, you have Adler, you have Jung, you have cognitive behavioral, you have Albert Ellis, you have Carl Rogers, you have humanistic, you have existential, you got Fritz Perls and Gestalt, and you have postmodern, you have narrative and family systems and all these different theories. And it's very important for a therapist to figure out how they see the world, because it'll determine how they treat their clients and how they talk about their clients. And we learn about theory all the time in graduate school and beyond. And I have spent the past 20 plus years really trying to understand all the theories, because I'm a professor of theory. And it also was just fascinating to me to learn these theories. All of them are great. I consider all the theories to have value and merit. And so in this next part, which is only going to be for patrons, I'm going to take this 72 question test, and I'm guessing it's going to take a long time, because each question I'm going to have to think, and I'll probably ponder, and I'll probably comment on what the question is trying to get at, and then I'll explain the theories, and I'll explain psychoanalysis a little bit. I'll explain I'm guessing they'll probably get at person-centered and all these kinds of things. So if you're not a patron of the podcast, this episode is just going to end, and that'll be that. But if you are a patron, you're going to hear the rest of it. I'm guessing it's going to take me an hour to kind of go through this. So if you're not a patron yet, do so now. Go to patreon.com, become a patron. You will hear the rest of this episode. And you'll also hear hundreds of other episodes that are only for, patrons of the podcast. Also, patrons don't have to listen to ads. So do that now. Become a patron. Also know that a certain percentage of your pledge every month goes towards various charities that we support. We give out several scholarships. We've given out thousands of dollars to students who are in need of money to continue their work in mental health. We've given money to LGBTQ charities, homeless charities, also to Pet Finder, which connects pets to human beings so that they don't have to be euthanized. So we've given, I think, almost like $15,000 or something. And so that's your money that you give to us so that we can funnel it towards those various charities. So become a patron, do so now.